people, I'm going to show you my most recent piece. I haven't painted it yet because I wanted you to see that, yes, I make most of the parts of these with nothing but hot glue coming out of this gun right here. So here it is. The only thing on this that is not hot glue is this egg right here. And if you can see in the tail here, there's a piece of wire right here in the tail. But you gotta get up close and look, and once it's painted, you won't even see that wire. But this leaf here is made out of, if you can see how it moves, out of an extremely thin piece of hot glue. Now this leaf, I hadn't gotten that technique down, so it's a little bit, this leaf here is a little thicker. But you can see the roses here. And you've got a tulip in here. And then there's another like foxtail thing here. And leaves. And there's a little daisy in there. So the whole thing is made. I'm shaking because I've been working on this. And see, one of the problems you do have to watch out for, I don't know if you can see it, is when you're done, you have to cut. You see that little string there? I don't know if, yeah, you can see it a little bit down by my neck. You see that? You have to come in after you're done making these and just snip those off. And do it before you paint, because if you do it after you paint, first of all, the paint will glob onto it and end up running to places you don't want it to go. But basically, how you make this is you've got to have a non-stick tray like this. This is a cookie sheet. And you put a glob. I'm going to try to do this with you watching me. Put a glob of hot glue on there like that. And then you just take, I don't know where it's at, take something flat like this and moisten it, and then just take the hot glue and press it down. And then just let, you see how that's glued on there? Let that cool. Because if you don't, when you go to pull it up, it's going to come out all crinkly. But you got to flatten it down as flat as you can get it. And if it don't feel like it's gotten flat under there, take a lighter or something and just heat up the metal a little bit. And then make sure you don't burn yourself. Re-flatten it. And just press it out until that metal is cool. And hopefully it doesn't stick to this thing. If it does, then you just take a blade from a like one of your box cutter blades. And I can't, there it is, right in front of my face. I'm not looking. You just take your blade like this. Now you see it's stuck onto it real bad. You slide that up underneath here. And first loosen it from the tray. got it off the tray. Now you just take your blade and you slide it up underneath the glue, and I usually go in half circles around it. Just go in half circles around the piece like this, because then that raises up the edges. Now when you're making, this is for like a petal. When you're making a leaf, you want to put a bigger glob on the back and then bring it up into like a cone shape, and then press it down after it's a cone shape. And it takes a little bit to get it off of the metal piece, and it sticks like that. That's why you got to make sure you don't want cold water to do this, because if you do, the hot glue, my hair's a mess today. I combed it, I swear I did. It's just a mess. If you use too cold of water, the hot glue will cool down too quickly before you get a thin enough disc. And depending on what shape you want the disc, on how you press it. If you want a perfectly round disc, when you press it down, don't slide. Just press straight down on a round bubble. I think I cut my hot glue piece. I slipped. Yeah, I did. Oh well, I can show you how to fix that too. It takes a little bit to get this off of here. There we go, we got it off. And then you get this little disc, and you see how thin that is? It's just a really paper thin little disc. And see, this and I cut a little bit right here. So what I do is I take the tip of the hot glue gun and just gently come across it. Like you're stitching across a piece of cloth. Just gently come across it. Just gently rub crosswise on it. And do that all the way along the spot that came apart, so you don't end up with a crack. And then use that as the bottom part of your petal. That way you don't see it. Unless you're like me, you don't care if that flaw's in there, because you know nature has flaws anyways. Then just go ahead and fold it the way you think it looks the nicest. Now I've got this disc, and it's nice and, as you can see, paper thin. What I do is I'm going to make a tulip. What I'll do is I'll fold in this bottom half. You see how that makes a little cone-like cup? I'll take a very small dot of hot glue, because if you put too much, the heat will be too much and it'll melt it and you'll burn your fingers. And you just hold it together like that and squish it so that the glue squishes up so it makes the shape you want, like that. You see? Now you can see how straight this edge is. You don't want it that straight. You want it to have a little fold like they have in nature. What I do for that is I take and I lay this on top of here just for a few seconds, and then just pull back just long enough for it to soften it. You see, if you leave it too long, what happens? That's alright. For me, I don't mind. You just gotta leave it for a few seconds. Just heat that up, and then I'm trying to do it one-handed. Pull back on that top edge. And like I said, you just want it for a second. Just enough to give it a little bit of heat. Pull back on that edge. And do that all along the edge here. Just a little bit of heat. Pull back on the edge and hold it for a second or two. Just a little heat. Pull back on that edge and hold it for a second or two. Just barely even want it to heat it up. Now, you're going to say, okay, now this is going to be extremely sensitive to heat. That's where your painting comes in. Your paint, first you paint it the color you want, and that will help stabilize the hot glue a little bit, so that even if it does get a little warm, you don't want to let it ever get hot again. But if it gets a little bit warm, it's not going to melt as easy. Because with the hot glue, as thin as this is, even getting a little bit warm might be too much. Okay, now you can see how the edge here, you see how it rolled over with that little bit? Now you know that little thing that goes on the inside here. The way you do that is you take your hot glue. I'm going to see if I can get it in there. You want to go with a fat spot on the back here, and then just draw it down and let go. Stop squeezing when you want your thin tip, and then you just let that cool. Let that cool for a while, and then you bring that up with this piece. Just bring it up, and then you just put a little bit of hot glue on the end, and you stick it inside of here, and that'll give you your piece. Now, sometimes when I'm doing this, what I'll do is I'll make the petal shape, and then I'll paint it after I'm done making the petal shape, you know, just the flat petal. And then I'll fold it, because then I don't have to try and paint this way. And then I'll make that centerpiece, and I'll paint that right away, and then I'll stick it inside. Because then you're not trying to get your paintbrush in here without touching the edges of the flower or whatever. You've got the piece already painted, dried, it's ready to go. And you're not going to have to fight with trying to, you know, not touch the leaf, or not touch the flower petal, or not, you know, touch the pistil in the middle of the flower petal. That's going to be a pain in the butt. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take and I'll make the flat disc piece, paint that first, then I'll use some hot glue to fold it in like this. Then I'll take and I'll get my little, see the little pistil piece? I'll get that, and like I said, you need to, the little string pieces up on the top there, you need to kind of clip them off, and then that's that. Now this back piece here is flat. Now I will put these in so that flat part doesn't matter. You'll be seeing it like this. Or I'll make a second one the same size as this, put it on the back, and then I'll use the tip of my gun like this and use it to come along And you can even just leave it like this and just come along and round off the side edges like that. Round off the side edges so you don't have a sharp looking edge. It's nice and smooth. But when you do it this way, it isn't as smooth of a piece. So you end up with something that isn't quite as smooth. You see how much smoother? I don't know if you can see it, but you see how the top looks? How smooth that is? And then you take a look at the bottom. It's a little bit more coarse looking. You just take your little piece here, and like I said, just a little dab of glue, and quickly as you possibly can, if you're not sticking to it, shove it into your flower, and there you go. You've got a tulip. And that's all it takes. And it's all made out of hot glue. And this is basically the same way you make your wing on your hummingbird. For the body itself, you dab out some glue as thick as you need it in basically the body shape. You don't flatten it, you just leave it and let it cool. And you make two pieces of that, one for the back that's thinner, and then one for the front part of him right here that's a little thicker. Now it's going to be a little bit flat anyways, but when you're done with that, what you do is you make your leaf, your wing shapes, like these two shapes here, and your tail shape, and you put it on the flat side of these pieces, and you put hot glue in there, and smush the two pieces, bring the two pieces together. And then you take and you put a glob in the center here, and with a wet finger, you shape out the shape you want the chest to be. And you do that on the back too. You just put a little bit of, you might have to put a little bit of glue along the edges here, and just with a wet finger smooth it out, or else you're going to get a sharp edge on the back there, and you don't want it to be a sharp edge. You want it to just naturally. And you'll have the same problem down here, so you just put, just the smallest, a bead of glue about as thick as what this beak is, along each edge, and then with a wet finger you smooth it out. And if it doesn't come out smooth enough, you use the tip of your gun and you just come along and do that. And then on your wings, I'll show you here, you just come along and you strip like this and come down and down and down and down. But on the front of the wing here, so you get that little muscle that's right here, you put a little glob and make a little triangle, and then run along with an extremely thin piece along the top here. And it's got to be thinner than this beak is. Get the beak, you do the same thing that you did with the pistil of the flower, but you do it really thin. And then you just put a very small, very tiny bead of glue on here and fit the beak on. And then you end up with your hummingbird. You see? And that is how you make a hot glue hummingbird and hot glue flowers. And like I said, depending on what shape you want your petals in, like on my daisy here, I wanted the teardrop shaped leaves. To do that, you make a teardrop shaped drop of glue on your tray, and then you flatten it out into this shape. Now I used my finger to do this one because it's harder to control when you're squishing it between two pieces. If you use your finger to do this, and you just start from the fat side and you get your finger wet, you press it down so it makes the bubble, and then you draw your finger down to keep this shape here. And then for the center, you just put a perfectly round little blob and just let it dry. Just let it dry, cool off the way it is, so that you get that little bubble bump in the middle. And then you turn it over and you touch the tip of each one of the petals on the back, and you smooth it out on the back as you're doing it. Otherwise you'll have these fitting on there so that they're not even with the outside. You'll have one back a little bit, one forward a little bit, and you want them to look like they're just growing out of that centerpiece. Now I'm going to show you something else that'll give you an idea of what everything looks like when you're done. Now this one I put some acrylic around the bottom of it, as you can see here. But you can see the petal from the one flower here, and you can see it real good when it's not on the thing here. But you can see the centerpiece there, and there's the acrylic leaf. And this one you can see it pretty good on. You see how the petals are on that. And that's what it'll look like after it's painted. And then if you put 3 coats of acrylic paint, this is epoxy on this one, and you can use epoxy and just thin coat the epoxy. You'll end up possibly with little things like, see that drip there? It looks like nectar. And then you get the drip here that looks like nectar or rainwater dropping out of there. You'll end up with that happening because it'll drip. Unless you stay on top of it and smooth out those drip areas, you're going to end up with some drip, because I put it on there pretty thick on purpose because I wanted the drip. And then you end up with something like this. And when you use acrylic, this comes out a lot stiffer. It's like a piece of plastic. See? When you use epoxy acrylic stuff, it comes out like a piece of plastic like this. When you just paint it, it's not quite as stiff, but it's still stiff. It's just not quite as stiff as when you use the epoxy, the clear coat epoxy. And you cannot touch the clear coat epoxy except for like on the edge here. If that keeps coming down, you take a pair of scissors and just clip it and pull back. Because if you touch the epoxy or even sand the epoxy after, it won't be clear like this is now. You'll end up with a cloudy look to it. As you can see, there's kind of a bit of a cloudy look to this side, and that's because I cut these pieces down, and then I had to just put a thin, like painted on coat of acrylic over the top so it went clear again. But that's how you do hot glue flowers and hummingbirds. And with this hummingbird, to help you out when you're first starting to do the hummingbirds and you're not quite to the level of being able to make a complete hummingbird just straight like this with all glue, what I did with this one is basically the body was made the same way, but I put a bead in where the head is, and then a piece of wire that come out to put the beak on. And I put the wire through the tail here, but I had the wire coming up through here so I could build off of the wire. Once you get good enough, you won't have to do that anymore. You'll know how to make, as you can see where the wire stops on him, on this hummingbird, it stops right there. Okay? The other hummingbird, I have it going all the way up into this spot here. Because I couldn't figure out how to shake the body without it, even with what I was doing. And it's because I wasn't quite as nimble with my fingers on how to do it, because my fingers shake like they do. And you can see, once you get practice and start, and before I was just trying to make the stomach part and building off to the back. You can't do it that way. You've got to make the stomach part, make the back part, and build off from the center, rounding everything out, and then putting the leaves, the wings in between the two pieces. With this one, I made the body part, and then I just attached the wings to it, which is a little bit harder and more delicate to do. With this one here, I made the wings first, the tail, and made the body part, and then squished between. With the head, I made two bubbles the same way you would make the center bubble here, and then stuck them together, and then shaped it. But I had to put a little extra bubble of the glue right where the neck is, so that this, and let it cool, so that this would come up high enough, and then just put a little bit of glue onto the two bubbles that were stuck together, put it on, and then shape it out with a hot glue gun. And doing it that way with the hummingbird, it really doesn't hurt much, because when you shape out like this, you won't have a smooth bubble. Well, a bird isn't really a smooth bubble. They may look smooth, but they actually have all those tiny little feathers. So if you end up with a little lumpiness to it, which I think I can get it close enough that you can see. I don't know. Let me see if I can get that to focus in. There you go. And you can see the little hairs on the back here that I got to take off. But you can also see that the head is a little textured. So you will have some texturing to it. You see how that looks? Now, here's the flowers. You see, there's the, get my finger on it. There's the foxtail one. This one's my best leaf on here. And you can see how thin that is. I mean, you touch it and it moves like a leaf would. And you can see my finger through it. As I said, these leaves here weren't made the same way, so you can still see your finger through it. Or what that one was made, this one here. You see, you can't see your finger through it as well as with the other one. Get in there. There. You see how cloudy it is there? You see how pretty much so clear? You can even see where the tip of my finger goes into the cuticle area. You can't see it as good here, because this leaf here is just like a smidgen thicker, like the wings are. Those leaves are about as thick as what my wings are, because I flattened them out with my fingers instead of between the two pieces of metal. And this one I flattened out between the two pieces of metal, so you end up with a better looking leaf out of it. And the rosebuds I did the same way. I did with my fingers. And then this, let me see, where's that tulip? This tulip here, I did with the metal like I did the other one. And you can see the difference between, you can see the leaf here, the petal here. You see how much thicker that is than this one is? See? And that's what you end up with hot glue. And you can make these, just a piece of wire and build off from the piece of wire. That's how I did this one that has the acrylic in it. I put the piece of flat wire in there, the shape I wanted it, and it came out kind of a curved shape, come around and up. And then I build off of that the flowers and whatever else not I want in it. Let me get this thing close so you can see. See, and then I build off of it. You can see the wire a little bit right in here. That's a piece of wire with some silk ribbon wrapped around it. And then that made my stem. It was some green silk ribbon, and then I just made my leaves and my petals and flowers to come off of that. And then I just tucked these flowers in around the edges of it to make this part. And the same thing I did over here. I just tucked them in. And that's how you make hot glue art.